is like an ancient spearhead thrust across the great Pacific Ocean. Long ago, a voyaging people made this their home. The story of the Polynesians is an epic natural history. Man and nature, each shaping the destiny of the other. In 1789, near the coast of Tonga in the Western Pacific, a British naval ship made history. The mutiny on HMS Bounty launched a voyage which would take Fletcher Christian and his crew across the width of Polynesia to the lonely island of Pitcairn. In a reckless moment, the mutineers set fire to their ship, cutting themselves off from the outside world. The destruction of the Bounty stranded Fletcher Christian and the other mutineers on one of the most remote islands in the world. But they were not the first to have followed this course. Polynesian voyagers, plants, and even some animals had traveled this route before. Just like the crew of the Bounty, some of these pioneers had also burnt their boats. The story of Polynesia, for man and nature, is an epic saga of splendid, but sometimes tragic, isolation. Polynesia is a world of tiny islands scattered across an endless sea. To the west, the islands are closer together, but the distances between them are still measured in hundreds of miles. The odds against individual animals or plants reaching and settling any isolated island in the middle of the ocean are small enough. But it needs a virtual miracle for a pioneering species to establish a lasting colony. In the Western Pacific is the Fijian island of Yanduatamba. This remote, rocky island is home to a mysterious reptile, the crested iguana. Its closest relatives live on the coasts of Central America, nearly 8,000 miles to the east. It seems extraordinary that this land lizard should have crossed such a formidable barrier of ocean. But it may not have been the adults which made the journey to these islands of the West Pacific. Rivalry intensifies at breeding time. There is competition for mates and for nest sites. Female iguanas often hide their eggs among the roots of trees. Torn from the land by a mighty storm, they could be carried far across the ocean and make landfall on a distant shore. The cyclone season brings death and destruction, but it may also transport new life. A tropical cyclone gathers strength in the vast expanse of the Western Pacific. Fueled by the sun, it gains energy and momentum until, like a demon spirit, it unleashes its madness and spirals outwards across the ocean. As the cyclone crosses the land, insects, birds, and vegetation are swept up into the sky and carried out to sea. Most perish, but some are launched on journeys of discovery. Cast away by the cyclone, a gecko clings to its life raft, a floating tree, itself a victim of the storm. Their fate now rests with the ocean currents. Though seldom seen by man, the yellow-bellied sea snake is the most numerous reptile on Earth. It spends its entire life adrift in the open ocean, hunting for prey among the lines of debris which collect where currents meet. Its striking colors are a warning to enemies. For fish, its venom is more deadly than a cobra. Colonies of corals spawn a blizzard of offspring. Carried by the ocean currents, they may drift hundreds of miles until, by chance, they settle on a far-flung reef and create a new colony. For every larva that survives, millions perish on the way. Manta rays, giant nomads of the ocean, reap the shifting harvest of the sea. With a wingspan of 20 feet, these ancient voyagers have the power to travel the ocean at will. "2,000 years ago, a new breed of mariners invaded this oceanic world. The great age of Polynesian voyaging had dawned. Polynesian voyagers devised a system of navigation far in advance of anything known to the rest of the world. Their navigators steered by the sun and the patterns of ocean swells, the shapes and colors of clouds, and the flight of seabirds were vital clues that told of lands far beyond the horizon. They became masters of the sea. These long-distance voyages of settlement were carefully planned and provisioned. Some reached epic proportions, lasting many weeks, perhaps months. An ample physique was the best guarantee of survival. At sea, to be big was to survive. In time, these tenacious seafarers spanned a third of the globe and reached every speck of land in the South Seas. Tenacity has its reward for other island colonists. For a forest dweller, this female gecko is a surprisingly good swimmer. But she also has another, less obvious talent. She needs no male to fertilize her eggs. When she makes landfall, she is able to give birth to an entire island dynasty, a sisterhood of female geckos, all identical clones of herself. Coconuts, the most widespread of tropical fruits, are designed to float for months at sea. A thick fiber husk keeps the nut buoyant, while the fleshy inside holds such large reserves of liquid that it can root and grow even on a sun-scorched beach. The great height of the coconut palm helps its massive seed to escape from the shade of the parent tree. The further the tree leans, the further away the fruit will fall. Here, on the windward slopes of Rarotonga, the largest of the Cook Islands, the palm trees all lean in an uphill direction. So each new generation of coconuts sprouts a little further uphill from its parents. The highest ridges of Rarotonga are home to another plant with giant seeds. The Phytia is a member of the worldwide daisy family. All its close relatives are much smaller and have barbed seeds, which hook in the feathers of birds and are carried from one island to another. But on Rarotonga, the Phytia has evolved into a forest tree, reaching 40 feet into the sunlit canopy. But there is a price to pay for this exalted position. Marooned on this small island, with seeds too big to be carried by birds, Phytia, like the crew of the Bounty, effectively burnt its boats. The forests of Rarotonga are home to other inhabitants unique to this island. The Kakarori flycatcher, one of the world's rarest birds, and the colourful kookaburra dove. But these birds, together with nearly all the other native wildlife of the Cook Islands, are related to species found in Fiji and the islands of Southeast Asia, on the western rim of the Pacific. Like the Polynesian people themselves, all these island pioneers must originally have spread west to east across the great ocean. Yet the prevailing winds and currents run in the opposite direction, east to west. But every 10 years or so, there is a dramatic change in this pattern. Unusually warm weather brings cyclones to the tropical Pacific. This climatic event sweeps across the entire Pacific, reaching South America at Christmas, where it is known as El Niño, the boy child. Islands in the path of such cyclones are battered by high winds and tidal waves. Entire forests are flattened. All manner of life, birds, spiders, insects, are wiped from the face of the land. And in the wake of the cyclone, the forest is left silent. El Niño brings destruction, but it also brings new life. In the heart of the West Pacific cyclone belt lies the island of Savaii, home to the Samoan flying fox. Like other fruit bats, it hugs the land, avoiding the open sea. Its original home lies to the west, in the jungles of Southeast Asia. Torn from the land by storms and blown from one island to the next, its ancestors at last found sanctuary in the forests of Savaii, the most distant point from the Asian mainland reached by any mammal without the help of people. The first great voyages of Polynesian discovery took place 2,000 years ago, at a time when the global climate was warmer than today. Seasonal El Niño winds would have favored their journeys of exploration towards the rising sun. But they knew that in time, if they found nothing, the prevailing wind would carry them back to their homeland. The night sky, a celestial map, took the place of charts and compass. For Polynesian navigators, the pattern of the constellations was used to fix a band of latitude, a sea lane marked by stars that led them to the dawn. For the first Polynesians, the atolls of the Central Pacific were like stepping stones laid across the ocean. Although these low islands lacked fresh water and were therefore unsuitable for permanent settlement, huge colonies of seabirds provided a ready source of fresh meat and eggs. Here, on Christmas Island in the Central Pacific, millions of sooty terns find safe havens where they can mate and rear their young. A land crab has strayed into hostile territory. To reach the safety of its burrow, it must run the gauntlet of outraged parent birds. These remote atolls are not just a mecca for marine birds. The shallow waters of their sheltered lagoons attract other ocean travelers, ancient mariners for whom these reefs are a place of pilgrimage. Green turtles have been coming to these islands for millions of years. When these gatherings first took place, this was a high island cloaked in forest. Now, eroded by time, It has been reduced to a coral atoll that can barely keep its head above the sea. But the turtles still keep faith with their ancestral breeding grounds. For 10 years or more, each one journeys thousands of miles following the ocean currents before returning to the island of its birth to join in the creation of new life. It will be night before the females come ashore to lay their eggs in the coral sand. For the males, the congress is over. Their duty done, they disappear one by one into the vastness of the ocean. Beyond the protective circle of reef, the open sea is a place of profound mystery, the nomadic domain of sharks. No one knows for sure why grey sharks congregate in such numbers along the outer reef. Perhaps they too come to breed, or simply gather at certain islands which serve as beacons in the otherwise featureless expanse of this immense ocean. Pitcairn, a speck of land in an endless sea. For months, Fletcher Christian and his crew had sailed the Bounty to and fro across the Central Pacific before tracking down this moat of land, their final destination. Here, they would burn their boat and commit themselves to their self-imposed exile. Pitcairn lay at the eastern end of the main island groups of Polynesia, more than 1,000 miles from Tahiti, well clear of the sea lanes sailed by a British navy seeking revenge for Fletcher Christian's act of mutiny. As they searched for a safe landing, they saw just how different this island was from the paradise of Tahiti. Less than a mile wide, Pitcairn lies just south of the Tropic of Capricorn and has no fringing reef to offer shelter from the relentless sea. Yet even here, life finds a foothold. The mutineers discovered that they were not the first to have made a home on Pitcairn. Throughout this wild and untamed island, there were signs of an ancient occupation. As they explored the cliff tops, they discovered quarries cut in the hard volcanic rock and ground cleared for crops. And where the men from the Bounty came ashore, they were confronted by strange Polynesian figures etched in the cliff face. Inland was a temple, guarded by 4 tikis carved in stone, which the mutineers rolled over the cliff, fearful of reprisals from the pagan spirits of Pitcairn's past. John Adams, the last survivor of the original mutineers, established a Christian way of life for himself and the Tahitian men and women who came with the bounty. 8 generations have passed since the mutiny, but modern Pitcairners are still fiercely proud of their notorious past and their famous ancestors. There are only 4 common family names on Pitcairn, one of which is Christian. Today's islanders, like Ben Christian, are equally proud of their Tahitian blood and of the Polynesian culture, which has become an integral part of Pitcairn's language and way of life. Although Christianity has replaced ancient taboos and pagan religion, Pitcairn keeps faith with the rest of Polynesia. Much of their social life revolves around wood carving. The sale of wooden curios to passing ships is an important source of revenue for the islanders. The beautiful pink-grained Miro wood comes from Henderson Island, a long day's journey northeast of Pitcairn. The Pitcairners' open-topped lifeboat is their only physical link to the outside world. Launching it is a hazardous event. The lifeboat is used to meet the infrequent supply ship as it passes by en route from New Zealand to the Panama Canal, and for their annual expeditions to remote Henderson Island. Beyond the reach of aircraft, the Pitcairners are as isolated now as the Bounty mutineers 2 centuries ago. Henderson, the very un-Polynesian name for this uninhabited island, is a bird's paradise. Pandanus trees along the beach shelter white-footed fairy terns, a race unique to the remote Pitcairn group of islands. The single egg, laid on a bare branch, is incubated in turn by each parent bird. It'll be 4 weeks before the chick is ready to hatch. Henderson lies just outside the tropics and has no rich coral lagoon. The birds here have to fish in the open ocean. When rearing an offspring, there is a fine line between success and failure. Grooming each other reinforces the vital bond between them. They are partners for life. Inland, a forest of Miro trees is home to the Henderson reed warbler. The island supports around 7,000 pairs of the species, uniquely evolved on this island. There is great competition for territory and nest sites. This juvenile from the previous season helps to rear another brood. Although it is not related to the parents or the chicks which it feeds, the young bird's efforts will be well rewarded. As a sitting tenant, it is well placed to inherit this valuable corner of island real estate, and with it, a chance one day to raise a family of its own. It is from this Miro forest that the Pitcairners harvest timber for their carvings. The yearly visit lasts no more than a day or 2. and has little lasting impact on the island's wildlife. Like the island of Rarotonga, Henderson is home to its own unique fruit dove. The bird has evolved a partnership with this Mersaini tree, another uniquely Henderson species. The tree provides nutritious berries, the seeds of which the dove scatters across the island, to mutual benefit. By comparison with mainland fruit doves, the Henderson breed is a poor flyer. The birds prefer to walk or clamber through the forest. On a small windswept island like this, birds that keep their feet firmly anchored have the least chance of being blown out to sea. Here, natural selection favours those that hop and flutter, and not those that fly. On this isolated island, the fruit dove has given up mobility in exchange for security. On Henderson, the survival game is played to different rules. With few predators, Henderson is also a paradise for insects. The tender leaves of the silver-barked Pisonia trees are often plagued by the larvae of an island moth. The caterpillars rampage unchecked across the island, stripping the trees of their leaves. Replete, the caterpillars abseil down to the forest floor, where they transform into adult moths. Wherever the plague has laid bare the branches, sunlight beams down through the canopy, rejuvenating other plant life on the forest floor. The island rat was brought here long ago by Polynesian voyagers who valued its flesh as food. They also brought pandanus nuts, from which they made a kind of flour. By smell, the rats hunt out the fallen fruits, also a favourite of the hermit crabs which infest every corner of the island. In the competition for this succulent prize, the rats have speed and cunning on their side, but the crabs' massive claws and thick armour give them the edge in close combat. The crabs have another great advantage. Throughout their lives, they never stop growing. The largest use coconut shells as mobile homes. With no natural enemies, these giant crustaceans live to a great age, plundering the island's forest in search of food. Carrion is their favourite delicacy. Seabird chicks fallen from their nests become helpless victims. In the natural economy of the island, nothing goes to waste. For the fairy terns, marauding crabs are just one of the hazards of island life. Now that their chick has hatched, the parents must satisfy their offspring's voracious appetite for fish. It is a task which takes all the energies of both birds for several weeks, each day, from dawn to dusk. In the real world of island life, there are inevitably winners and losers. That is the tragedy of paradise. Without its mate, the hapless single parent has little chance of meeting its offspring's growing demands for food. On a tropical island with a rich lagoon, there would be a chance of survival. But here on Henderson, the simple saga of life and death is more apparent. The west and south coasts of Henderson are guarded by steep, undercut cliffs. Here, ocean swells have blasted limestone rock, creating caves. The debris scattered on the floor of this cliff-top cave was not thrown here by wave action. It is the remains of a human occupation, which lasted at least 700 years. Fishhooks, carved from mother-of-pearl, show that these first Polynesians were fishermen, but discarded bones show they also hunted birds for food. Scattered across the cave floor are remains of a flightless, dodo-like pigeon, which in time was eaten to extinction. Yet one flightless bird survived against all odds: the Henderson rail. Better known to Pitcairners as the chicken bird, this dapper little species has the distinction of being the sole surviving flightless bird in the whole of eastern Polynesia. Although flightless now, the ancestors of Henderson's chicken bird must once have flown here from another island. Like the island's fruit dove, the power of flight then became a hindrance to survival. To become totally flightless takes many generations. But now, these birds are marooned forever. Their fate is inextricably linked to that of their adopted island home. More than any other of this island's extraordinary inhabitants, Henderson's chicken bird has irreversibly burnt its boats. Beyond the Pitcairn Islands, 4,000 miles of open ocean stretches eastwards to the coast of South America. 1,000 years before Columbus ventured across the Atlantic, Polynesian voyagers had discovered and settled the only habitable island in this, the remotest part of the Pacific. It marks the most easterly corner of the Polynesian Triangle. Easter Island is a place of mystery and intrigue. Here, in splendid isolation, Polynesian art and religion flowered as nowhere else. Long ago, Easter Island rose from the sea. Its volcanic craters were once covered in lush forest. Its temperate climate and rich soil made it habitable for the people who discovered and tamed this wild terrain. Fire was the key to clearing land for crops and villages. Native birds, including a flightless rail related to the chicken bird of Henderson, were easy prey and soon became extinct. As the population expanded, a ruling class arose. Their authority came from the power of ancestral spirits, embodied as mighty statues, the Moai. With crude stone tools, the soft volcanic rock of the sacred quarry was fashioned into monumental works of art. By an extraordinary system of ropes and posts, the islanders manhandled the giant statues across the rocky landscape. As more statues were completed, more trees were felled to create levers and rollers. In time, the forest was consumed. At their final destination, on the Ahu platform of chiefly tombs, the Moai were brought to life. Fitted with eyes fashioned from white coral, they became the island's living faces, to watch like sentinels over the lives of their creators. Once the last tree had been felled, the sacred quarry was doomed. Without the means to move them, the statues were abandoned. Obsessed by their statue-building cult, generations of islanders had neglected the health of their land. With no trees to protect the soil, crops began to fail. Hungry people died. The island entered an age of darkness. Tribe rose against tribe as civil war ignited this isolated speck of land. With no timber to build boats, there was no escape from this tiny island. The people were marooned in a hell of their own making. No other civilization on Earth has so effectively burnt its boats, nor so dramatically caused its own extinction. Today, the sightless Moai and barren landscape are a monument to the tragedy of Easter Island and a sobering lesson in the fragility of man. Easter Island became the most extreme outpost of the Polynesian world. Its story is unique. But elsewhere in the Pacific, Other voyages had taken the Polynesian way of life to lands where ingenuity and resolve were not thwarted by isolation. Far to the north, they discovered Hawaii, a new homeland where Polynesian culture grew from strength to strength.